Hey guys, what's up? I just wanted to talk a little bit about Mass Effect Andromeda. So, in a lot of the gaming forums or groups that I'm in, there seems to be a pretty split opinion on, well, I wouldn't say pretty split, I'd say more 60-40 about Mass Effect Andromeda, with 60 being, oh, it's not that great of a game, and 40 saying, I still like it and I enjoy it and I think it's a great game. I am part of that 40%. So I figured I'd give my 2 cents on Mass Effect Andromeda. So, I think one of the big problems with the newest Mass Effect is the main character. At the beginning of the original Mass Effect, you get to create a little bit of a not very detailed, but a little bit of a backstory for your character and whatnot, whereas in this, you're just Alec Ryder. Not Alec Ryder, you're Alec Ryder's son. And to be honest, throughout the entire game, it keeps reminding you of that. You are nothing more than Alec Ryder's son, and you inherited his position basically because of nepotism and hereditary succession. But whereas in the original Mass Effect trilogy, Commander Shepard was his own character. They didn't tie him to any of his family or any of that. They let the player decide who Commander Shepard was. Whereas in this, you're constantly reminded that it's less immersive in that you're constantly reminded that your character already has all these ties to different characters in the game. It's not a thing of you get to go make your own journey. You kind of do. But in this one, you have a sister or a brother, depending on whether you choose female or male Ryder. Which I think is an improvement on the original, just giving players more choice of what their character will be as far as that particular part goes. But anyway, you have all these ties to these other people already, rather than having a very basic background history for your character, and then the player decides everything else from that. Another thing is that with the original Mass Effect, Commander Shepard was already an established badass before you even started the game. He's an N7 officer. Now, for those who don't remember or who didn't really play the original trilogy, N7 would basically be it's kind of a combination between the Navy SEALs, Delta Force, Force Recon, all of that combined into one thing. The N7, which was a human military special operations designation in the Mass Effect universe. So you were already a badass in this game series, and then you just built off of that character story. Whereas in this, the only reason why your character gets chosen for... Hey, spoilers, by the way. Not really spoilers, because it happens in the first 5 minutes of the game. The only reason why your character becomes a quote-unquote Pathfinder is because your dad dies and he's the current Pathfinder, and he chooses for you to become the next one. That's really the only reason why your character is in the situation that he's in, because your dad dies and he chooses you. That's it. It's not through any effort or some great feat of that character's own. It's because someone else put that on him. That's all there is to it on that. They did do some I would say improvements. So in the first Mass Effect, there were planets you could land on that had nothing to do with any missions or any stories, and you got to travel around it into Mako. It was basically, I guess, an LAV or a Striker, but on steroids with PCP placed into those fucking steroids. It's basically a tank that could drive anywhere and do anything. It had jump jets. It could be dropped out of your fucking starship and whatnot onto a planet. It was pretty cool. They took that out of the other two games. Mass Effect 2, I think, had a little bit of DLC where you got to play in a vehicle. And then Mass Effect 3, I think, had a little bit more of that. But they never really brought back that thing of you traveling around a planet and exploring a planet in a vehicle and not have it be a set mission for you to drive from point A to point B. It was, hey, here's the planet, explore, have fun, maybe you find everything, maybe you don't, but that's up to you. Mass Effect Andromeda brings that back, at least on the main planets. On the main planets, on every main, well, with the exception of one, every main planet that you can put an outpost on, it lets you establish forward operation stations, and you can call what is now called the Nomad in. It's basically a civilian version of the Mako, meaning, unfortunately, there's no fucking big old tank gun or machine gun mounted on it. I think that would have been cool for some boss battles and whatnot, like have some boss battles set up for you to fight inside of your Nomad like they had in Mass Effect 1 with the Mako, but that is something that they paid attention to, customers saying, hey, we would really like the Mako back. Can you please bring that back? Mass Effect 2 introduced planet scanning. Basically, you would sit, and there's literally several hours of gameplay dedicated to you. Fly over to a planet, enter your scanner, and then you just spin the planet looking for resources, shoot a probe down, and gather resources. Several hours of that. In this, they improved on that. They still have the scanning in that you can go to a planet, open up a scanner, and gives you information about that planet. If there's something special on there for you to collect, it says, hey, there's an anomaly here. Open your scanner, and it's a really quick spin of the planet, and you find what you need, shoot a probe, and it's done. Easy. So they listed customers there who wanted a way to find out information about planets, but they didn't want hours and hours of just sitting there, holding left trigger, moving the right stick to spin the planet, hit the right trigger once in a while to launch a probe, wash, rinse, repeat, and that's how you had to play the game if you wanted the best ending. Excuse me. Another, I would say, problem with this game is that when Mass Effect first came out on the consoles, I would say it was pretty innovative, with you being able to choose your character's story, what happened with your character, being able to kind of make your own character. Yeah, there were scripted things in there, and there was an end point, there was a starting point, there was an end point that you worked towards, but from what I remember, I think, but I'm not sure, that Mass Effect came out before Dragon Age Origins. And it was a pretty big thing. There weren't any games like Mass Effect out on the consoles. None at all. And they did a pretty good job with it. All the dialogue was fully voiced. You could choose different dialogue options, and your character would voice those dialogue options. That's no longer innovative. That's standard run of the mill open world RPG stuff for consoles now. Now, if you don't have a voiced protagonist that can voice a shit ton of different dialogue options in the same conversations, it's looked at as, oh wow, you didn't really put a whole lot of effort into this, did you? Even though there's been years and years of work put into this sort of thing. I think, to be honest, it's just a thing of, it's just not a new idea anymore. And so people, rather than taking it and enjoying it, have said, well, this is crap. No, it's not crap. It's the same thing that you've enjoyed before. It's just you're so used to it now with other games. Let's see. One thing that is an improvement, but is also kind of the same thing, is the enemies in Mass Effect. So, once again, spoilers. If you don't want spoilers for Mass Effect Andromeda, just stop watching the video. 1, 2, 3. Okay, cool. 3 seconds. Alright, so the enemies in Mass Effect Andromeda, the Ket, basically take the way that they reproduce is they don't have sex, they don't divide themselves like cells or anything. They take another organism and they literally change them to make them one of the Ket. And that organism is willingly part of the Ket now. It's kind of the same thing as what the Reapers did with indoctrination in the original trilogy. So you still have the same old shtick of, hey, you still have the same old stick of, hey, my enemy can use my allies against me type of thing. That thing's been used a whole lot. Mass Effect kind of improved on that aspect, but I mean, zombies and all that shit and mind control were out way before the original Mass Effect, but Mass Effect did a pretty good job at bringing that horror, I guess, to life. Putting it on a screen in front of you and making you feel like you were actually fighting against it. Whereas in this, it's like, oh, really? So it's basically the Reapers, but kind of not. It's kind of a repeat enemy, basically. On the bright side, you don't have to fight any more blue zombies. As keep going on with the enemies, they even use some of the sound effects from enemies that kind of use the same sound effects for enemies that were in the original trilogy. This enemy wasn't really introduced until Mass Effect 3, but the Banshees. They were a very powerful biotic enemy that could use, that could basically throw space magic at you, and if they got close enough, they could one-shot kill you by picking you up, grabbing you, and impaling you on their claws. In this, you've got the Ascendant, which is an enemy that uses space magic to shield itself and to throw that at you. And if it gets close enough, it can one-shot kill you by surrounding you in a shield and crushing you. They're basically the same enemy. They even scream at you whenever they enter the map, just like how the Banshees did. There isn't as much of a horror element in this one as the original trilogy. Now, don't get me wrong. The original trilogy wasn't a horror genre. That's not what it was. That's not what it tried to be. But the enemies in it were truly horrifying. They would scare you sometimes. They even had little once in a while, a cutscene that with a jump scare in it or whatever. Just to make you feel like the enemies were creepy, were scary. In this, it's just more of the same thing. There's nothing really horrifying about it. It's basically, there's a lot of enemies with guns. They have some that are a little tougher than the others. Some have shields, some have armor, and that's about it. I mean, there's nothing really unique about the Ket from what the Reapers were, to be honest. It's almost like they didn't want to go from the ground up on an enemy, but they wanted to make it look like they did, and so that's how the Ket were born. On the other side of this, you do still have Raiders. You had those in the original trilogy, so repeat there as well. But you do have the Remnant, which is a robotic race. Now, some people might immediately draw similarities to the Geth. To me, they seem completely different. considering that the Geth was the main antagonist, well, the Reaper was, but controlling the Geth was the main antagonist in Mass Effect 2. Then in Mass Effect 1, sorry. Then in Mass Effect 2 you had the Collectors. Then in Mass Effect 3 you actually had the Reapers. But it was... yeah. But in this one, you kind of have two main enemies at once. The Ket is still the very main adversary. The Remnant are kind of more of a fixture of the environment, I guess. Yeah, so that's all I'm going to say on the enemies. I know I'm already having spoilers in here, and I don't want to completely ruin it for some people. So, another thing that people might have a problem with Andromeda is that in Mass Effect 1, you already had all these different races in the game. You had the Turians, the Solarians, you had the Quarians, you had the Krogan, you had the Asari. You even had ones that weren't really part of the main story. You had the Volus, you had the Hanar, and in Mass Effect 2 they introduced the Drell. You had the Batarians, which were only looked at basically as a type of outlaw until Mass Effect 3, when you could actually talk to some of them and whatnot. You had all these different races, whereas in this, the only races in the game really were humans, Turians, Solarians, the Asari, and you run into those pretty much right away. You have the Krogan in there, but they're not as throughout the entire game as what they were in the original trilogy. You have the only new race in this is the Angara. So you've gotten rid of the Quarians, the Batarians, the Hanar, and the Drell. So you've taken away 4 races, and you've only replaced it with, I guess, 2 races, technically, if you count the bad guys. The Angara and the Ket. I don't count the Remnant as a race because they aren't even sentient like the Geth were. They're just robots. So, it kind of feels like they cut some things out of the game. And at first, it seemed like they did it... Sorry, got some stuff on my camera. At first, it seemed like they did it just to make some DLC. And I was fine with that. As long as the DLC was good and decent, then yeah, but put time into the game, the main game, make that, and then have your DLC, but make it lengthy, substantive, make it worth your $1. However, there's rumors going around that they aren't even going to try to make any DLC for the game. EA has said that those are just rumors, and they haven't, they haven't said that they're not considering DLC. But to be honest, that answers a far cry from saying, yeah, we're having DLC, we're going to expand upon this game. Saying that you're not going to do something is not the same as you're going to fucking do it. So, it does seem like some things were left out of the game. Other than that, I think the story was pretty good. You still have good character interactions. One thing that I think people might miss is the Paragon and Renegade dialogue tools, I guess. In the original Mass Effect trilogy, sometimes you'd have an option to give a Paragon answer, which was basically good guy, or Renegade, which was rebel, badass, bad guy. Answers to some characters. You even had some QuickTime events where if you pull a trigger, one of the triggers in the middle of a conversation. So let's say it was a Paragon. Sometimes the Paragon would lead to you jumping and saving a character and getting them out of the line of fire. It could lead to you sending a message to make someone feel better, whereas the Renegade would be you were using your scope just to scout the enemy position, but if you press right trigger for the Renegade, you can take out one of their scouts. In others, it completely interrupts the conversation just by shooting the other person in the face. You don't really have that in this. All they did was take the dialogue options that were given to you, and they divided them into, I think, 4 different, sorry about my thumb, 4 different classes. You had your curious, you had your confused, you had your empathetic or sympathetic, and then you had your rational dialogue choices in this. And they're represented by different symbols in the conversation tree, but I haven't really seen that affect the game as much. I'm going through on my second playthrough, and I'm trying to choose different things than what I did on my original playthrough, and I'm honestly not seeing different results. Whereas with the original Mass Effect trilogy, even in the first one, you'd have very drastically differing results in what happened in the game. So, yeah. As far as the story and how it went and the conclusion, I thought that was pretty decently done. I think people should give this new Mass Effect, I don't know if it'll be a trilogy or whatever, but this new Mass Effect series some time. The original trilogy, obviously by the name implies it was 3 games, the original trilogy kept building on itself. In that, yes, the game designers did do a story in each and every single one of their games, but the decisions you made in Mass Effect 1 carried over to Mass Effect 2, and the same applied to Mass Effect 3. Now, some decisions were pretty, had a lot of impact in how your story went in the other games. Some of them were pretty minor, but they at least mentioned them. In this game, you don't really have the opportunity for that. I think a lot of people expected that their decisions in the original trilogy would at least have some impact, or at least be mentioned in this one, but that none of that really happens. The only thing that you get to choose when you start up this game, the only thing to ask you was your Commander Shepard male or female? And to be honest, that really doesn't even matter, because they never mention Commander Shepard in the game at all. They don't have a codex like they had in the original one. In the first Mass Effect, if you ever paused the screen, you could enter something called the codex. And this was basically a shit ton of lore that they wrote into the game to help explain the universe, tell what's going on, explain what the Mass Effect fields were, which was how the series got its name. It explained how different technology worked. It gave some backstory on all the different races. In this, you don't have it. Your codex is more or less of, as you play through the game, the codex is basically a repository for what you have done so far. It doesn't really give any information on what the universe is, what's going on with it. All the codex does is tell you information that you've already found out, and it just keeps it there as a reminder if you ever wonder, oh wait, why did this happen? Why is this character interacting towards that one that way? Well, go into your codex and find out. Whereas in the original trilogy, it was a way for them to give backstory. This doesn't really have any of that. Let's see. I've had some people complain about the character customization, but to be honest, you have the same amount of options as what you did in Mass Effect and Skyrim, Fallout, any other game that lets you design your own character. The weapons, I do think the sounds for the weapons are done a little better. Let's see. It seems like there are more weapons in this game than what there were in the original trilogy, which I think is cool. They do have a lot of weapons from the original trilogy. They have the Avenger, which is basically the rifle that's posted on every single Mass Effect, I guess, games poster or games cover that's been out. You have a bunch of different weapons that you have used in the past in the trilogy, like the Viper sniper rifle, the Revenant assault rifle. But you also have new technologies that's introduced from the Andromeda galaxy, like Angaran weapons, Ket weapons. You also have a separate section dedicated towards remnant weapons and armor you can craft and stuff like that. So that's pretty cool. I like the level of customization you have for your Nomad. You can improve the boost and all of that stuff. I still wish I had weapons, but but you couldn't customize the Mako in the first trilogy at all. In this, you can give it better boost, you can give it better suspension. In the first trilogy, the Mako really only had one gear, and you just press go to go. Whereas in this, you have to be a little more careful in that you have one that's made for traveling on relatively flat terrain, which lets you go faster and whatnot. But then you also have another gear you can put it in that lets you do the Mako thing of climbing up steep mountains and shit like that. This Mass Effect also, I don't know. I won't say it feels more scripted than the other Mass Effects, because the others were scripted, and this lets you have the same amount of choice in it and whatnot, but I don't know, it seems like there's something missing. And I can't really describe what it is. It seems like there's something missing from Mass Effect Andromeda. I do think it's worth your money. If you really like that type of game, go play it. But that's all I've got. Bye.